I want to talk with you about the intersection of the circle and the reptilian brain. The first thing that I understand now that I did not understand even a few years ago is the function of the reptilian brain, of trauma, of the fight, flight, freeze, please operating system, of hatred, and of sociopathic behavior. Now, if you look at the foundation of life, and we have to look at its largest cycle from emerging out of something the size of a pea. Now, we're definitely in the territory of magic here, right? A massive double standard, a huge hypothesis, stunning and awesome magic. Scientists, in all of their objectivity, in all of their double-blind experiments, in all of their, if we can't recreate it in a test tube, it has no validity. If you can't see it with your five senses, no validity, have come up with an astonishing hypothesis that cannot be recreated in a test tube, that can't go through a double-blind, that no human has ever seen, let alone that particular scientist. And the hypothesis is this, that out of nothing has come the universe that we know for no particular reason. Just poof, there we are. Nothing, then something, very, very small. And then there is not a single scientist alive or who has ever lived that is able to compress a very small planet in the larger scale of trillions of planets hypothesized or visualized through telescopes today, that can be compressed to the size of a pea, right? We're not even close. I don't believe we are even able to take a mountain or a lake and compress it into the size of a pea. We may not even be able to take a single house and get it into the size of a pea. But that is the story we tell today. And whether or not we believe that story, and it is inevitable that it will evolve, one thing is certain: through 10,000 cults, through 10,000 cultures in human history, the story has never stayed the same. There is not a single point in human history where the story remained the same for more than a few thousand years. And our story in the last 1,000 years, right? We've had multiple stories, right? We've had Christianity with all of its hypocrisy, and we're going to kill the world to make them Christians so that they won't kill, and Islam. Buddha wasn't supposed to have lived too many thousands of years ago. But then all of that upended with science. And then science has been consistently changing its story, right? Darwin and his evolutionary theory, barely, hardly being willing to publish it, right? Because it was in contrast with Christianity. then that has been evolving. Right? Now there's missing million-year periods in the evolution. Like, how did they get from here to here? But let's not talk about that. The speed of light isn't always constant, but let's not talk about that. Right? The politics of science. There aren't any other life forms in the universe. Then there's 1 billion planets. Then there's 3 billion planets may be able to support life. That can all change month by month, year by year, or as old scientists die out and fresh evidence has built up to support a new theory. The only thing that has truly stayed the same is that humans have made up new stories to explain the data they're focusing on at the moment. That seems likely to continue for the next trillion years if we're still here as a species. What about this story? What about that story? Now this story combines with this story. How about this? Because the bottom line is that reality is so much bigger than the human mind that there will always be what's called anomalous data on the outside of the theory. Right? You look at free market capitalism, there is anomalous data that doesn't support the perfection of the market. You look at communism, there's anomalous data it doesn't support. Right? If people are forced to share everything and that's the way it's done, and then why have so many people died in communist regimes? If Christians are so great, why do they kill so many people over the last 1,000 years? I mean, anomalous data is always present in any human conjured story or narrative about reality, because reality is bigger and always will be bigger than the human beings that attempt to describe reality in verbal and mathematical language, which is a symbol of reality. It's not reality. So science is a terrific story, meaning it works better in many cases than mythological stories. I mean, a myth is terrific at understanding any number of aspects of human nature and our relationship with the world. Science is terrible at that. But science is terrific at helping you produce 10 million relatively constant tablets of aspirin on time. So each story has their function, and none tell the full story, and none account for all of the data. Right? And we're not really yet at a point where we are comfortable saying, hey, this story kind of allows us to predict the future over here and over here, but it doesn't work once in a blue moon. It just throws us off. And that's good enough, because no story is ever going to be perfect. Right? We just want the statistics, right? If you're going to bet on a horse, you just want to place a bet using a system that is right 85% of the time rather than 55% of the time. You want a better story, and there's always going to be a better story. Well, if we look at evolution, which is a story, we see a cycle from one thing to something better as we describe it. And why do we describe it that way? Well, because we are the byproduct, right? Now, some human beings tell the story that life is getting worse, that humans are destroying everything wonderful, and so we have evolved, life has evolved into something worse. Other people tell the story, life has evolved into something better. But what I want to focus on is the development of the human brain as a fractal representation of the development of life on Earth. Life on Earth in the current story began with slime and bacteria, and we begin in the womb as slime and bacteria. Life in the evolutionary story, cells separate and then form and become more complex cells. In the womb, we separate from one cell into more complex cells. We tell a story. Eventually, the blob, the amoeba, starts developing distinct specialized instruments. Eyes, ears, fingers, a heart. Life was once in the ocean, and we emerge in the ocean, in the womb, in the liquid womb of our mother. Later, life came out on land, and we emerge out of the water onto the land through our mother. Life was first developed as reptiles. The crocodile, one of the oldest animals on the planet today, 200 million years old. Well, we develop a crocodile brain. In fact, without our tailbone, we could see that we were once with the spine a crocodile. But we have diverged, we have shifted from the crocodile, from the lizard. Eventually, we stand erect, and as we go through our maturation process, we first crawl, and then we stand erect. Now, the reptilian brain has an operating system. It's called fight, flight, freeze, and in its human iteration, please, or ass-licking. It's based on the law of mass. The law of mass says that whenever a small pattern of energy collides with a big pattern of energy, whenever a pinball collides with a bowling ball, the pinball bounces off, the bowling ball continues. Now, the reptilian brain functions in response to the law of mass in a competition for energy. And this is how it works. In a sociopathic paradigm, the paradigm of the reptilian brain, long before the human brain of empathy and the sociopathic, when a large energy encounters a small energy that can be useful to it, it consumes it or intimidates it into something useful. The larger pattern remains, the smaller pattern dissolves or is repurposed. Think of the interaction between a human being and a carrot. A simpler, smaller pattern of energy is consumed by a larger, more complex pattern of energy. Now, in the competition for energy, larger patterns, more complex patterns, consume smaller and simpler patterns. And there is a competition at times for the small patterns of energy, and the larger patterns may face off in a fight, flight, freeze protocol. Now, the protocol is you run from something bigger and stronger than you. You chase and fight something smaller and simpler than you. You run when you can't consume. You fight when you can consume. And if neither of those are expedient, you hide, you freeze, you conserve energy. Right? If you can't get away, there's predators coming on both sides, you curl up in a little ball and conserve energy. Because your odds of survival are higher if you cannot get away. Like if you're out in an open plain and a grizzly bear is coming your way, you don't run. You're going to get exhausted, and there's nothing you can do to outrun the grizzly bear. So your reptilian brain will paralyze you. And maybe the grizzly bear will not speed up. Maybe they'll get bored on the way. Fight, flight, freeze. Now, human beings add an ingratiating level of ass licking to this protocol. It's called please. Right? I will help someone who is stronger and bigger than me on condition that they protect me with their greater mass. I will submit to do what they want me to do, as long as they keep me alive, as long as they keep me rich, etc., etc. Fight, flight, freeze, please. The reptilian brain. Now, the reptilian brain has a function in the evolution of life. Within the possibility field, within the probability field, within the actuality of Earth, there are an ever-iterating language of patterns, different patterns of energy. And they're all in relay, in a relationship. They exchange, they impact one another. And it's important to understand that 99.9% of all species, of all iterations of species that have ever walked this planet are now dead. And what remains are the most efficient, are the most intelligent of all of those experiments. Of all the different plant forms, of all the different fish, of all the different birds, of all the different animal forms, of all the different human forms, 99% of them are now dead. Now, some of that is, of course, just generational, but a lot of that is dense forms of energy that are slow and stupid have been consumed by other forms of energy that are faster and more intelligent. Right? When you introduce something like a wolf, anything that is just filled with meat and waddles along dumbly on the surface, that died out long ago. So, what is life breeding for? It's breeding for efficiency. It's breeding for complexity. It's breeding for competency. The most competent lion in the pride gets more prey, looks better, gets a better mate. The most competent lion in the pride hunts better, gets more meat, looks better, gets a better mate, makes more offspring, and competency survives. Competency is what emerges as the fruit of the reptilian brain. This competency is a foundation in our lives. It is a foundation of a certain level of abundance. If you are competent, you become more abundant. Now, out of this breeding for competency comes the next brain. It is a rational or pattern organizing brain. And what it allows us to do is to become more efficient reptiles, more efficient sociopaths. The rational reptile is the most efficient, the most competent, the most dangerous animal to other animals on the planet today. Because the reptilian brain is incapable of empathy. It's not its purpose. Its purpose is to consume energy to the best of its ability. And if it is superior to all other patterns of energy that it encounters, it will remain. It will serve life by existing. It will serve life by saying, I did not die. I am here because I was fast enough. I was skilled enough. I was lucky enough. I was big enough. You know, we'd probably all be ant foods if we were this big, right? Ant food, rat food, bird food, right? But we were big enough. We were big enough to survive. We are here. And the very act of being here says that we have more competence than anything that is not here. That is the fruit of the reptilian operating system in dinosaurs, in snakes, in alligators, and in the rational reptile that every human being begins as and may or may not transcend, may or may not move through. If life did not select for competency, meaning if we were so dumb we couldn't lift our hands up, some animals are. If we are so dumb that we stand there in the face of a hungry grizzly or alligator, we cannot take life to another level, right? Life would not evolve beyond the alligator, right? And so in the competition. To compete means, in Latin, to draw out the best in the other. We see that in capitalism in response to communism. There's no incentive to compete in communism. It is a flawed protocol relative to capitalism because it bypasses the winnowing process that kills out 90% of all businesses die because they cannot compete. They cannot challenge their opponent. Their opponent challenges them to such an extent that they die, but they cannot challenge the opponent. Life evolves when you have at least two competitors that don't kill each other, but that keep evolving something better in each other. They keep reaching deeper into themselves. Google and Microsoft, they're incapable of killing each other. They tried, they'd love to, but they are incapable of killing each other. And so they compete, right? They compete. Having to develop new and new services. Like governments tend to be a disaster of stupidity and inefficiency and destructiveness because they don't compete, right? They're a monopoly. You go down to your local building center, you try and get anything done. You're in a monopoly framework with stupid people working in an old and antiquated structure. Alive, creative people do not want to sit at a permit desk following a stupid system. They don't want to do it. Right? They want to be pushing their edge, creating something new. Right? When two great companies compete for the public, prices go down, excellence goes up, service goes up, right? That is a sociopathic program. You look at the frustration, you look at the hatred, you look at the underhanded tactics, the false advertising, the scheming in both companies, and they try to destroy one another, hire away their best talent, make it harder for the other one. Right? It's a sociopathic protocol. Now, if you look at what happens in a predatory situation in any arena, excellence is the byproduct. The fastest lion gets the slowest, sickest, oldest gazelle. The fastest gazelles continue and breed. The lion kills off the runts. The slowest lion dies of starvation. The fast lions remain. And the fast gazelles remain because they outran the lion. The fastest lion, the fastest gazelle, because they outran the lion. What remains is faster lions and faster gazelles at every iteration, at every generation. And so lions get faster and smarter over the 100-year period, and gazelles get faster and smarter. Unless one of them wipes the other one out. Right? Or human beings evolve faster and smarter and wipe both of them out. Life with both the rational brain, with the reptilian brain, is facilitating survival. With the rational brain is facilitating security of survival. Right? We all have a reptilian brain to allow us to survive in a reptilian environment, in a sociopathic environment that is present on the world today. There are millions of patterns of energy at any given point that are trying to consume us as a byproduct of their growth. And our reptilian brain, our fight, our flight, our freeze, and our ass-licking is allowing us to survive and retain our survival in that environment. The rational reptile, the ability to imagine, to grasp patterns and predict the future with those patterns, that increases our efficiency 100-fold. With the rational operating system on top of the sociopathic brain, our efficiency goes up 100-fold. We are maximizing efficiency 100-fold, allowing security of survival. Security of survival. The reptilian brain breeds for competency. And it's important to understand that without competency, survival, comfort, security is impossible. In other words, it is a foundation. If you take away people's ability to speak, their ability to think, their ability to move their legs and arms, their ability to type, if you remove people's competency, evolution goes back to mush, and we have to evolve again. Because the human brain, the empathic brain, rests on security. Meaning until you have, in many ways, a superabundance, there is no space, there is no context in which the empathic brain can do its work, can be useful. To care about yourself and others and watch everyone die incompetently is horror, is hell. Right? The empathic brain, the human brain, on top of the human animal, the rational reptile, is the most dangerous and powerful animal on the planet today. It is not human. It has a body, like human beings have a body. But the human being comes in with empathy. The rational reptile is the fastest, most powerful animal for organizing energy. The human being is the first animal with the capacity to love, to meet the need for love and belonging in the language and the paradigm of empathy. That cannot be done until the security of survival is at a certain level. The way it works is trauma is a symptom of survival threat or perceived survival threat. Trauma sends blood to the rational brain, and even deeper into the instinctive fight, flight, freeze brain. Trauma sends blood to the reptilian brain. The reptilian brain is the most developed, the most potent, and the oldest brain. In a tension between the new brain of empathy and the old brain of fight, flight, freeze out of fear, the old brain will always win. If you have 1,000 people and you induce traumatic fear, the vast majority will become prisoners of their sociopathic brain, whose job it is to keep them alive, to keep them alive. Now, I'm going over all of this because you didn't get any foundation in this. You were born children of hippies, you were born into the New Age, you studied channeled entities, and they don't deal with the reptilian brain and the rational reptile. You look down at your rational brain, at your rational reptile, at the coldness, with disgust, with dislike. You don't understand that it is the foundation of all life. That was not given to you. And so I'm going to continue this conversation later. We're going to take a break. But it is essential that you understand the foundational nature of sociopathic behavior of the rational brain, of the reptilian brain, and the way it is the first two steps in the unfolding of love. You cannot love what doesn't survive. You cannot love what is insecure in its survival. If you try to have a loving relationship with someone in a traumatized state, they will not feel your love and they will be incapable of loving you. That does not open, that does not emerge until they survive and are secure in their survival. Then they have the capacity to feel love and to be loving. Now you can mimic love, and out of the rational reptile, they want this, I want this, so I'm going to do that so that they're happy. That's rational reptile, mimicking love. It's not bad. It's ass-licking, basically. But to have genuine empathic love, you have to be dealing with someone who is secure in their survival. Now, this security can come through transcendent security, the deep integration and connection with the self, beyond the ego. Or it can happen by co-creating a world that is safe enough that the egos in that world feel secure in their survival, and thus begin to hunger for the third human need, love and belonging. Thank you for your attention, Dane, and for dealing with one of the more difficult things for me to deal with and grasp and understand, and something that I know you didn't grasp and deal with in our past until around age 40, and are still coming to terms with. This is a big deal that will continue to be a big deal over the next 5 or so years. Now, we're looking at the reptilian brain in the concept of a hierarchy. That the reptilian brain breeds instinctually for competency and lends itself to co-creating the top 1% of competent patterns of energy on the planet. So if your life, you want to become, you are in everything. If your life, you're in everything, you want to become competent. And the best way is to put yourself in everything and then engage in games to compete, to explore, to try different things and learn what works. And what remains is the top 1%. Of all the different life forms in that experiment, what remains is the top 1%. Now, the top 1% is necessary to become competent enough to survive and meet that need. The first human need in Maslow's hierarchy of needs is to survive and give birth to a new operating system, which is the most important accomplishment of life in this context, to give birth to the rational brain. The rational reptile is 1,000% more efficient than the instinctual reptile. The rational reptile can invent a cell phone, right? And it is important to understand that at least 70% of all human behavior is a relay between the reptilian brain and the rational brain. What would make me look good? What would save me time? What would save me money? How could I get the better end of this engagement? The rational reptile calls the hardware store to avoid a trip that would take 1,000 times more energy than just calling up, do you have this part? Or looking online, or buy with one click. We're saving thousands of times the energy it would take to do this thing instinctually. The rational reptile can say, you know what? If I was to buy this, 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 and this, and organize it in this way, for the rest of my life, I would reduce my expenditure in this area by half, which over the course of a lifetime is thousands of times less energy than just every day for thousands of. It's a tremendous accomplishment. So we're looking at that in that foundation, and this superabundance that is created by the rational reptile then gives birth to a new operating system, the human operating system. In response to our third need for love and belonging, which requires the empathic brain, the human brain, and an entirely new operating system. The difference between in the tension between the rational reptile and the rational empath. So you have the rational brain as the bridge, you have the sociopath, and you have the empath. The pure empath, if you want to understand what territory you're in, the pure empath is who is in the most pain. How can we help? Empathy is about us. It's about the circle. It's about the group. Who is in the most pain is the first stop of empathy. Now, we are a long way away from that. We as a cult, as a family, say who, and as an individual, I look inside and I say, which part of me is in the most pain and how can I avoid feeling that pain? As a family member, we look at what is the darkest shadow the most painful element in the family, and how can we avoid dealing with that? 2 sociopathic protocols at the individual and family level. We then move at a cult level, and we say, okay, our homeless, our poor retirees, our sick, our most vulnerable, our bereaved, the people who've just, let's not invite them to the party and let's go have fun away from them, right? So we're a long way as a cult from coming close to the first level of empathy. Now, the second level of empathy is who has the most joy, the most vulnerability, the most opportunity, and how can we celebrate, how can we support that, right? And so it moves based on the intensity of positive and negative feeling and a group response. The sociopath is simple. What do I want, regardless of what anyone else wants, except that's going to get me blowback. Meaning, if what I want to do is this, but I don't want to be attacked for being a sociopath. And so I will show up at this birthday, I'll send this card that I don't really want to do to avoid dealing with the backlash of not doing it, right? So we're in pure sociopathic territory where I'm sociopathic and I don't want to deal with the backlash for being perceived as sociopathic. So I'm going to do this, this, and this that makes me appear less sociopathic because I only care about me and I don't want other people to judge me. I don't want people to make me look bad, etc. So it is complete narcissistic self-centeredness with the bridge of rationality, which tells me that, when I just ignore people's birthday, when I walk across people when they need help, when I kick children because they're shouting, when I throw a rock at a dog because it almost bit me, then I look like the bad person. And I don't want to look like the bad person. So even though I'd like to do all those things, my rational overlay of enlightened self-interest says that I'll politely ask the homeowner or the person to take care of their dog. I won't throw a rock at the kid. Maybe I'll do something covert, pop their bicycle tire some night, or at least, think about it, etc. So I'm a sociopath with a rational overlay of a politically correct veneer. And that is definitely a step up. That's a huge step up from the instinctive sociopath, because the instinctive sociopath just has no filter and throws the rock at the kid, shouts at people that are irritating them, does whatever is expedient with complete integrity to their narcissistic influence. But what I want to look at now is the dark side, the sociopathic side in the context of the circle. Because this is another thing that I am still grasping and making sense of. But the circle, the sphere, is the ultimate shape in the universe. It is both infinite and one. In that way, it contains the masculine and feminine. It is the most graceful shape. It is the most paradoxical shape. And it is the most common shape. Circles, elliptics, torus, spherical shapes are the most common in the universe to one extent or another. The planet, the sun, orbits, right? We're dealing with spirals, we're dealing with circles, we're dealing with spheres. We're moving towards symmetry. And so it's an important shape, more important than the pyramid, which is not as common. Now let's look at negativity and positivity, light and dark. First of all, in the unbroken whole. Before the fall, before the knowledge of good and evil, before the divide Before the wound that cuts the world in two, there is one. Before language, mathematical and verbal, there is one. One. And the first step into consciousness is to divide the one into two. Now, once that wound has been made, once that break has been made, we can divide it into any number of polarities, right? Doesn't matter where or how we divide, we're taking the one and we're dividing it into two. And once we divide it into two, we have the idea of an extreme, an archetypal extreme that doesn't exist, but it's the idea of the perfect white and the perfect black, the perfect up and the perfect down. Now, it is important to understand that when you divide the one into two, you have two equal polarities, right? There's the common thing like, is good stronger than evil or something like that, and it's a meaningless division, because if you've done your math well and you've divided the one into two, they will be two equal parts. Now, chauvinism believes that one part of the whole is innately better than the other part. So male chauvinism, you have the one, you have the human species, you divide it into male and female. And then Mr. Chauvin, a Frenchman, says that, well, first of all, the French were better than everyone else, right? That's where it started, right? But then male chauvinism is men are better than women, right? Now, this is false, except from a certain point of view, right? A mathematician will not tell you that this half is better than this half. That would be absurd, because it just means you didn't cut it properly. If you cut an apple in half, and then ask a mathematician, is the right half innately better than the left half of the apple? It's ridiculous, right? How about cutting the planet in half? Let's just go along the equator, cut the planet in half. Now they're both maybe bumping into each other. Oceans are pouring into the edge, the molten cores. Which is the better half? There isn't a better half. There isn't a better half, and the best, quote, half is when the two halves function as one. Now, this makes sense geometrically. I mean, if you cut your tire in your car in half, well, which is the better half? Do you want the upper half or the bottom half? It's meaningless. You want them together as one. And this is why we call it the fall from grace, the fall from the garden. We have the ecological whole, and then we start cutting it up into bits and saying, this is my land and that's your land and this. And it doesn't work as well as it did as part of one ecology. Right? So we're bringing I, otherwise known as ego, into the equation. And we're saying, I want my family to do well, and who cares about those other families? Or my country is the good one, and who cares about the other one? Or my planet is the only planet, or my race or my beliefs, right, are the good ones. So we're dealing with chauvinism. We're dealing with self-referential bigotry of various forms, to say that this is better than these other expressions of energy. And so we're trying to elevate me and what I identify with. But it's a shaky argument, right? So you could say that as soon as you apply chauvinism, when you cut the world into two equal halves, whatever those halves are, and apply chauvinism, bigotry basically, you create a war that distorts reality and is ultimately a war with yourself. Because let's take the human body and cut it in half, right? Well, which is the right half? Do you want the right side? Oh yeah, I want the right side, right? So we'll be on this half. But it's really dumb, right? Let's cut the family in half, and which is the best half, right? Which is the best half of a family, right? If you get a divorce, should the kids go with the dad, with the mom, in an archetypal sense? It's a ridiculous question. It just means you don't understand ecology, right? If you're caught up in, oh, my heart's a bit more on the right side, I want the right side. In case you didn't know, you die when you get cut in half, and well, no matter which side you are, you're dead. You're interdependent as a whole. Now, from a certain point of view, right? So you get into the nitty-gritty of the specifics, you could say, well, mom has more money, so the kids will be better on that side in that situation, right? But it is a certain point of view, and it's highly influenced by cultural value hierarchies. For example, if you're a materialist, you will focus on who has the most money. And the kid, oh, aren't they lucky, right? They live in America, right? Not necessarily. If you're a psychologist, you might say, aren't they lucky? They're happier, they're more alive, they're more embodied, right? Again, if you're a capitalist, you might think that the white-collar people sitting in a cubicle with their office, oh, aren't they lucky, right? If you're a somatic therapist, you might say, God, those poor white-collar workers, they never get in their bodies. They can't integrate and digest the trauma. You'd be so lucky if you could be a bricklayer and just get all that stuff out of your body, stay in shape, and be present to the moment. Right? So it is very important to understand that cult brings in a dogmatic point of view that says that this is better than that. Now, it gets to extremes like we as egos, our greatest fear is death and the unknown. So death is the biggest unknown, and it's death. So how terrible, absolutely terrible, right? But if you're a transcendent, what greater adventure? The people who die are the lucky ones, free of the body, free to find out the true mystery of what's on the other side, right? The people who are traumatized in childhood, they're the cursed victims of abuse. The people who are sexually abused, traumatized in childhood, when they transcend that, a Madonna, an Elon Musk, go on to create, to innovate, to express parts of themselves that less than 1% of the population has an opportunity to do. Right? So, right? If you become Christ on the cross and forgive those for their cruelty, if you become Christ by forgiving cruelty, are you lucky or are you cursed by the cruelty? So as we move into the circle, I want to talk a little bit about the relationship between the up and the down. Because this is something that Lazarus does a terrible job with, right? And your main influence in developing philosophically would be what I would call an up and up and up philosophy as outlined by Lazarus in a variety of successful and more successful, happiness and joy, more happiness, love and yet more love. And yet that's not how the sphere, that's not how the circle actually works. So let's look into this. When you fall in love with the innocence of your child, let's say that's one of the pinnacles of the human experience up here. When you fall in love with the innocence of your child, you get married, you have a child. Statistically speaking, if you are not completely sociopathic, you will discover a love for that child that you did not know before. And it is a pinnacle, right? Michael talked about the amazing experience of us being born. So, a pinnacle. Okay. Now let's look at when you see something beautiful, good, innocent, magnificent, vulnerable, and you identify with it. This is my child. The ego is now invested. This is mine, my child, right? And I must do what? Protect, provide, do something, right? The ego makes up an identity. Well, one of the interesting corollaries is if you look at the most disgusting behavior, the most violent behavior on the planet, you will usually find that there's a relationship. But I must take care of my family, says the sociopath pharmaceutical company that is, foisting drugs, knowing that 1 in 100,000 people will die of heart failure, knowing this, suppressing this study, elevating this study, right? We must take care of something, right? So in other words, it doesn't matter what it is. When you become attached to something, it will take you into the darker elements of the reptilian brain. Why do people kill their lover in a fit of jealous rage? Right? Because they are attached to who they become in relationship with their lover. They are attached. I want to be with this person because it feels so good. But you did this and now I can't be with you and that feels so bad. So I'm going to kill you. Right? It feels even worse to imagine you with somebody else and them feeling good while I feel bad. I'm going to kill you. And then at least I won't feel bad that someone else is feeling good, right? So what I'm saying is that the way the circle works is your greatest hope is correlated with your greatest disappointment. Your greatest goal is correlated with whatever it takes to get there. If you believe 100% that this is the right thing to do, you will do almost anything. You just look at Christianity and the butchery and cruelty of inflicting their dogma around the world. The Spanish, certainly we're not talking about Spain. We're talking about who had the navy and Christianity at a given point in time. So that was Spain, right? But humanity as a species, right? If you look at the Spanish interactions with Puerto Rico, Haiti, Dominican Republic, right? The islands on the way to the Americas. If you look at the greed, if you look at the butchery, if you look at the rape, the macheteing of women and children, you find some of the cruelest faces of humanity. In order to get gold, we will betray your hospitality. We will kill, torture, and rape men, women, boys, little girls. And the church will sanction it because it means the survival and increased rank of Christianity in Europe. Sheer brutality. Schizophrenia in a certain sense, right? If you don't understand the circle, it is schizophrenic. If you just look at devotion, love, the ideal, we've got to make the world a better place, rape, torment, lies, brutality, dehumanization, right? So that the church can be great, right? That's the connection, right? So you will find an innate connection between what you care most about, which is always something beautiful, good, and true, and your darkest instincts. Your greatest hatred will be for the one who destroyed what you love. If your greatest hatred is because someone gave you the wrong flavor of ice cream, that's your big crisis in life, your great trauma. You went into the ice cream store at age 30, you asked for a strawberry ice cream cone, and they gave you vanilla. And this is where you're stuck, right? I asked for strawberry. He gave me vanilla. Strawberry, vanilla, I don't get it, right? If that's what you're talking about as you're wandering half crazed on the streets in a sociopathic cult that will move you along without giving you any therapy, right? You're not being honest about what you're dealing with, right? People do not go insane because of a scoop of ice cream cones. People do not murder because of an ice cream flavor. But they do murder over jealous love. They do go insane over jealous love. They do commit suicide over jealous love because it's the most important identity, which is always connected with the brightest hope, the most beautiful future, the most exciting possibility. In other words, the volatility of going from here down to here is one of the most painful, terrifying, traumatic forms of volatility. Now, this happens at every scale. As soon as you expand your pain, you expand your ability to experience ecstasy. As soon as you expand your ecstasy, you expand your ability to feel pain. Now, this is a relationship that is obscured in a psychologically illiterate cult, but it is the most important relationship to understand as a human being. The connection between the up and the down, between the most sociopathic behavior and the most transcendent behavior. And the connection is competence. If you are competently transcendent, it stays. If you are incompetently transcendent, it will become incompetent reptilian behavior, which is why psychological literacy, cultural literacy, mythological literacy, traumatic literacy is the single most important thing to understand as a species today.